Hello Year 7 and welcome to this week's reading article with me, Mr. Walker from History. And I'm very excited to read this article with you as it is about the red poppies, which you should know from when we wear them during Remembrance Weekend for all those soldiers who died during World War I, but all other wars that have since followed. It is an article about Moina Bell Michael, and it describes her as such. Moina Bell Michael, 1869 to 1944, was an American teacher who was known widely as the Poppy Lady. In this informational text, Elizabeth Walsh discussed how Moina got her famous nickname. As you read, take notes on why Moina felt motivated to wear the poppies. And it also describes a poem that she wrote. And now the torch and poppy red we wear in honour of our dead. Fear not that ye have died for nought. We'll teach the lesson that we rout in Flanders fields. From a poem from Moina Bell Michael. So this is going to be an exciting read. You will notice that I have already put for you the start of the story. So make sure when we reread the story that you come back to 1 minute 25. Before we do start reading, let me just introduce you to some key words that you may not be familiar with. And I've chosen 3 words that are linked to the military. The first one is this title, lieutenant. Lieutenant is a rank in the army. So right at the bottom of the page there, you can see it has the word lieutenant. If I turn over, there are 2 other words I thought that we should look at. One is a veteran. So whenever we refer to a person as a veteran, in this context, we're talking about an ex-member of the armed forces. Veteran can also mean a person with great experience. But as this is about a military story, we're talking about armed forces. And the Legion Auxiliary, what's that? Well, this is actually a collective name for all those war veterans and the wider families of those veterans. So bear these key words in mind as we read through the story. Okay. Let's look at this article. One afternoon in November 1918, Moina Bell Michael hurried through the streets of New York. She wore a bright red silk poppy on her coat's collar and carried a bouquet of 24 smaller poppies. World War I was raging overseas, and Moina was determined to do her part. Maybe the red flower would remind the people of the American soldiers fighting in Europe and the sacrifices that many had made. Moina was a teacher at the University of Georgia when war first broke out. Friends, neighbours and students had gone overseas to fight. Moina planned to do more than knit socks or sweaters or roll bandages for the Red Cross. She wanted to encourage the soldiers before they left for war. Volunteering for war. Moina travelled to New York City to care for the soldiers at the YMCA headquarters at Columbia University. There was nothing she enjoyed more than sitting and chatting with the soldiers. She looked at the photographs of their families and sweethearts and listened to their hometown news. She bought fresh flowers to brighten the room when the weather outside turned dreary. Earlier that November morning, one of the soldiers had left a copy of the Ladies' Home Journal on Moina's desk. She turned to the marked page of the magazine and found a well-known poem which began, "In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row." Moina had read the poem before. She knew that Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, a Canadian physician, wrote it while treating soldiers on the battlefield of Flanders in Belgium. Now, remembering the soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel McCrae's poem, Remembering Those Men, always touched her. But that morning, Moina was struck by the last verse and accompanying illustration. Soldiers with sad eyes stared at a battleground blanketed in white crosses and bright red poppies. The soldiers seemed to speak to her. "Remember us," they asked. Moina thought about the soldiers at the Y, how they had left their families and homes to protect the freedom she enjoyed each day. To Moina, they were heroes. Silently, she made a promise. She would always wear a red poppy to remember the soldiers. She wrote her promise in a poem. Just then, 3 YMCA war workers stopped by her desk with a check for $10. They thanked her for all she did to brighten the room. There was no doubt about what Moyna would do with that money. I shall buy red poppies, she told them, creating a symbol. Moyna showed them Lieutenant Colonel Macrae's poem and a poem. Word spread quickly. Before long, everyone wanted to wear a red poppy. It wasn't easy finding silk poppies on the streets of New York, but Moyna was successful. Hurrying back to the Y, she handed them out. She dreamed of the day that every American would wear a poppy to remember the soldiers. 2 days later, World War I ended and Moyna returned to her students in Georgia. True to her promise, she wrote letters to leaders around the country suggesting they adopt the poppy as a national memorial symbol. But as she taught returning servicemen, Moyna soon realized another purpose for the small flower. Many of the servicemen had no jobs, no money. Some were wounded or too ill to work. Maybe the poppy could also help the veterans and their families. Her hard work paid off. In 1921, the American Legion Auxiliary adopted the poppy of Flanders Fields as its memorial flower. Other national and international veterans organizations followed. Disabled veterans who were members of the patriotic groups made crepe paper poppies, offering them for donations. Pennies, nickels and dimes poured in. During the years that followed, the poppies raised millions of dollars in the United States and England to benefit veterans, war widows and orphans, and the flowers reminded people of soldiers everywhere. To Moyna's delight, the message of the poppies spread to 50 other countries. At last, her dream of helping soldiers was coming true. For the rest of her life, Moyna Bell Michael was known as the Poppy Lady. She received citations, awards, and words of praise from around the world, but the Georgia school teacher did not feel like a hero. What I did and I'm doing is no more than any other person would have done, Moyna insisted. I only thought of it first. Okay, so what you now need to do is you are now being asked to reread the story. So go to the start of the story around 1 minute 25, and we would like you to read chorally, which means you read with me out loud, read the story aloud with me, and then complete your reading. It's been a pleasure reading the story to Year 7. Have a good homework session. Take care.